The president has announced his pick for new chief of staff. It'll be Mick Mulvaney. The current budget director is also a former congressman. How might that be an asset for the administration as control of the House flips?
It's going to be a huge asset for the administration. I would say a plus for the administration in that regard, because Mick Mulvaney gets Capitol Hill. He knows a lot of Republican and Democratic lawmakers from his time serving on Capitol Hill. We have seen many members, Democratic members of Congress who are going to be filling those key leadership positions, such as oversight and judiciary, say they're going to go after the president on issues regarding his tax returns, on the Trump Organization, Russia. So I think Mick Mulvaney will be able to help the administration navigate it. And it's not going to be difficult, but in the administration's view, they're thinking hopefully he'll make it easier for them to deal with those Democrats and Republicans in the House.
Well, from a future White House staffer to a former White House staffer, let's talk about the president's former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. He's set to be sentenced Tuesday. The special counsel recommended little to no jail time for him. Should we expect anything different?
We'll have to see, because Michael Flynn, according to the special counsel, he did cooperate heavily. A lot of critics of the special counsel, however, say that they essentially, Mueller and his team really put Flynn into a corner and tried to, they would argue, tried to get a confession or something out of him and pressured him into doing that, and maybe saying something in their view isn't necessarily true. And we've seen Michael Flynn last week came out and criticized the special counsel, and then Mueller's team hit back saying, well, you decided to lie to the FBI. That's not our fault. So we'll have to see how that goes. I mean, we know that a lot of other the recent former associate of Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, for example, he got a very heavy sentence of 3 years, although that's a slightly different jurisdiction. But we'll have to see. This is a very serious matter for them.
Right. So many people basically to keep track of right now, given the number of legal proceedings as well. Meantime, former FBI Director James Comey will be on Capitol Hill Monday for his second installment of testimony before Congress. Julia, why is there another session being held?
Well, we're seeing another session being held because we're seeing Republicans trying to get as much out of him as possible while they're controlling the House. They want to be able to really target him while they can. You know, their narrative while they've been controlling the House during the Trump administration is to try to investigate alleged bias at the Justice Department and the FBI. So there has been this back and forth. So they're trying to fit in the last time they can with Comey while they're in power, because come January, that narrative is going to flip, and we're going to see Democrats investigating the Republican side of things in the Trump administration.
Well, speaking of Congress, this is the last week they can strike a budget deal ahead of a looming government shutdown Friday. Does it look like we'll get a compromise?
At this point, it's very unclear, because we haven't seen Republicans really come up with a set, clear plan for immigration. You know, if Tuesday's contentious meeting in the Oval Office with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer proved anything, it's that there's quite a bit of tension between the Republican side and the Democratic side. And I think the Republicans are looking for leadership from the administration from this. And President Trump publicly said during that meeting that he would be willing to shut down the government so he'd be able to, stand up for that funding he wants for his border wall. But Chuck and Nancy, as he calls them, don't want to give him the full $5 billion for that border wall. So interesting dynamic there. We've seen that other Republicans are really looking for that lead from the president, and they obviously don't think it's in their political interest to have a shutdown like that. But it depends on what direction the administration takes us in.
All right, we'll see if we need to clear our calendars here shortly. Finally, we're not quite through 2018, but of course it's never too early to talk about 2020. A poll of Iowa voters out Saturday found former Vice President Joe Biden leading the pack of potential Democratic 2020 contenders. Now, the CNN Des Moines Register survey saw 32% of respondents backed Biden as their first choice. Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressman Beto O'Rourke also received double-digit votes. What can we learn, if anything, from these early numbers, Julia?
Well, the first thing I will say to this is all of the polling you're seeing on 2020 right now is about name recognition. You know, I've talked to a lot of, campaign sources close to this race and what could potentially happen. And I think a lot of people think that the person likely to run in 2020 to challenge President Trump from the Democratic side hasn't yet emerged yet. You know, if we go back to this point in 2014, when Jeb Bush was the leading Republican contender and Scott Walker was trailing him, Donald Trump was not on the radar yet. So we'll have to see how this goes. But one interesting thing about those findings is that there are 3 white men leading that list. And if the Democratic Party constantly touts itself as a party of diversity and inclusion, but it's interesting that, first of all, there are 3 white men leading that list, and that there has been so much attention given to Beto O'Rourke, who lost his race in Texas to Senator Ted Cruz. You know, obviously he made major inroads as a Democrat in that race, but, so did candidates in other red states such as Stacey Abrams, who took on for the that in her governor's race in Georgia, or Andrew Gillum. So it's a little odd to think this is the party that is supposed to be representing diversity, but we're seeing 3 white men lead that list. But then again, it's very early, and that list could completely change in just a couple of weeks or months.
Absolutely. And no doubt those are the kinds of conversations that Democrats themselves are having at this particular moment. All right, Julia Manchester in Washington for us. Always great to have you. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thanks, Elaine.